With this version of Super Samurai Market, today's presentation introduces a very robust looking Juyo designated blade. And the blade is a Nijime 2-character signature of Nobukuni. So to understand the variation and different generations of Nobukuni, I'd like to give a little background information, sort of more out of historical interest. But the first generation Nobukuni was from Yamashiro province and is said to have been the son of Ryokai Hisanobu. And as well, he was a student of Soshu Sadamune. So this activity would have been taking place from the early to mid-1300s, which places it in the Nanbokucho period. So the influence and area of origin was actually Yamashiro, and later through teaching by Sadamune, there was an introduction of Soshu features. So the second generation Nobukuni made blades in the middle 1300s, and the third generation continued to the end of the 1300s and through to the Oe period. Additionally, there were other Nobukuni smiths of very high ability, and one was Minamoto Saimon no Jo, or Genzaimon no Jo Nobukuni, and the other was Minamoto Shikibu no Jo Nobukuni. And we'll look at this a little bit later because this is important in identifying this particular smith for this sword. So there are very few swords that remain of the first generation. There are some extant remaining from the second generation, but primarily a lot of the signed Nobukuni works emerged in a relatively short period of time, right at the end of the Nanbokucho period and the beginning of the Oe period, which introduced, the Muromachi era. So this part of the presentation is to sort of lay the groundwork, and our goal is to focus on the information that we have and then designate the most likely Nobukuni that made this sword based on evidence presented on this video and from what we know historically about these various Nobukuni smiths who were, many were active at the same time. So now let's examine some features of the sword itself. So from the video, you're going to see the progressive images from the Kisaki following the blade towards the Nakago. So visibly, you're going to see features in the Jihada. You're going to find rather dense Itame and Mokume, and then you'll notice there's thick Jinie, and if you look very closely, you're going to see Chike. The overall hamon, as it's progressing here, shows Notare and Gnome. And then, a very significant thing, if you look closely, is you'll see Yahazu Ha. And that is an important aspect of, later we'll find out in the identification process. So there's also Nie, Kintsugi, and Tsunagashi. So lots of activity. So this is a lively blade full of hataraki. In addition to that, you see we've progressed through the area where there are horimono. So the horimono present on this sword include bonji, the kuwagata horns of the insect, which is also the same kuwagata that's used in the shape of maidate on kabuto. There's ken on both sides, and multiple bonji. So some of these have been polished down, evidencing that, you know, they were on the blade for a long time and probably are original to the blade. And that's another feature that we need to pay attention to in identifying which Nobukuni made this sword. So, looking at the boshi there, hopefully you noticed that it was Notare Komaru with Hakikake. And again, we're going through, look carefully at the hamon, try and identify some of these features. The idea that there's yahazu featured in the hamon, this is the knocking point on an arrow. So there's a certain particular shape, and they usually come in pairs, and then it diminishes. So there's a certain regular pattern there that appears. Again, we're progressing through the stage where the bonji exist and some of the other features of the horimono. You can see there's a deeply cut ken. So this blade is katana length of 68.2 centimeters. That comes in at 26.9 inches with a sori of 1.5 centimeters, which is what we'd expect for a sword from this period, sort of late Nanbokucho. That's 0.6 of an inch. It's got depth. The motohaba is 2.8 centimeters, which is 1.1 inch. All in all, it's a stocky, robust, very strong-looking blade. And here you can see the very clear Nobukuni, well-cut nijime. And the blade had 3 mekugiana, 2 of which have been filled. So, you can also see that there's an early sayagaki for this sword as well. And that sayagaki indicates that this blade actually had a value of 500 gold coins. And the sayagaki was done by Kosan Sensei in Showa 23. So it was valued all along in its history, and even more so when it became recognized as a Juyo sword. Some other aspects of this would be the influence of Sadamune in the distinguishing features of the sword and this special yahazu component. So when we take all of that into consideration, basically a kind of identity emerges for this sword. And what we know basically is the smith Shikibu no Jo Nobukuni, who's said to have been the younger brother of Genzaimon Nobukuni, was very skillful in his horimono. So it's quite likely that these horimono were original to the blade and that they were the work of Shikibu no Jo Nobukuni. Now, further reinforcing this idea that he's the most likely of smiths to have created this sword is the presence of this type of sword notch yahazu feature inside the hamon. So, in summation, basically, the suggestion is that this particular blade is the work of Shikibu no Jo Nobukuni. And if you check references, you'll find out he was very highly ranked and evaluated. all in all, it's a pleasure to study and examine this sword, and it would be a fine addition to a collector with early interests in swords from Nanbokucho and early OA.